Good morning, everyone, and welcome to GVA on this beautiful Friday in Bismarck, North Dakota. We're going to open the hearing on 1315. Let's take roll. Jackson.
Chairman Schauer.
Here.
Vice Chairman Satrom.
Here.
Representative Vale.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Christie. Grinberg.
Here.
Carls.
Here.
McLeod.
Here.
Rohr.
Here.
Schneider.
Here.
Steiner.
Here.
Van Winkle. Vetter.
Here.
Wolf.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Representative Wolf, weren't you in charge of telling Christie that it's 8:25 starts? Okay, let's try to work on that. That's all right, sounds good. House Bill 1315 will open up the hearing. Jackson.
House Bill 1315 is a bill for an act relating to the deployment of the North Dakota National Guard and to declare an emergency.
Representative Heilman, welcome to GVA.
Chairman Schauer, members of the committee, I would say that it's good to see you again, but I've never been in front of this committee before, so now I can say I have.
We're very nice people most of the time.
Yeah. Chairman Schauer in his head is thinking you're about to regret coming to this committee. Kidding. It's good to see you all, seriously. But my name is Matt Heilman. I'm a state representative from North Dakota's 7th Legislative District in Bismarck. I'm here today to testify in favor of House Bill 1315. This bill is to help bring us back to our constitutional foundation. In this bill, it says unless Congress exercises their constitutional authority under Clause 15 of Section 8 of Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, the North Dakota National Guard may not be deployed into active duty combat as defined in the bill. This bill would not restrict the ability of the governor to deploy the National Guard for civil authority missions. They would just not be able to go into active duty combat. House Bill 1315 not only addresses the abandonment of the U.S. Constitution in the modern day, but it also addresses the issues of endless wars and the sanctity of life. Our last constitutional war was in World War II. In 1950, President Harry Truman deployed soldiers to fight in Korea. He sought no declaration of war from Congress and claimed the United Nations empowered him to engage in, quote, police actions, unaccountable to the people's representatives. And we've heard the term policing the world quite a bit in the last 20 years especially.
Over 36,000 GIs died in Korea. During the Korean War, the legislature of North Dakota actually passed a resolution demanding that Congress act to bring all troops and military personnel home from the peninsula and end the fighting. Governor Norman Brunsdale also demanded a withdrawal of military recruiters from our state. My great-uncle actually fought and died in the Korean War, and my grandpa also served in the Korean War as well, so this issue is near and dear to my heart. This legislation has been supported by many notable people, including the Director of National Intelligence nominee, Tulsi Gabbard, Secretary of Health and Human Services nominee, RFK Jr., U.S. Senator Rand Paul, U.S. Senator Tim Sheehy, recently elected in Montana, and Congressman Thomas Massie. One of the biggest supporters of this legislation is actually the current nominee for the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. So if he gets nominated to the Secretary of Defense, that is going to be huge in this movement. And this legislation has been introduced in many states and has been passed in one chamber so far in the following states of Idaho, Arizona, and New Hampshire. I included an attachment at the very end of my testimony that I emailed to all of you this morning of all the National Guard members who have served and died since 2001. This is a real issue where people are actually dying in this state and from this state. And what for? That's the big question, right? So 14 souls, 14 of them have left this world. And many of these people who died were around my age, as you can see in the testimony. It specifies the age that they were at when they died and the cause of death. The justification for the invasion of Iraq, for example, was that they had weapons of mass destruction. And we all know how that ended up not being true. 8 of the 14 members of the North Dakota National Guard at the end of my testimony died in Iraq. And the United States spent 20 years in Afghanistan until President Biden pulled out all the troops in 2021.
20 years. I'm 23. That's pretty much my entire lifetime. What did North Dakota or our National Guard benefit from these wars? Did the families and loved ones of the 14 people also benefit? I would say probably not. President Eisenhower actually warned us against the military-industrial complex in his farewell address, saying, quote, "In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist." I also believe, actually, that if this legislation does pass, it will increase recruitment in the National Guard, because then people will know that they won't have to be fighting in unconstitutional wars or go into countries like Iraq and Afghanistan. And you'll hear many opposing arguments coming, but the fact of the matter is the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and the Constitution says that Congress has to declare war. And that's really the intention of this bill, is to get back to that founding document. And one of the other main arguments you'll hear around this bill is losing federal funding. From what I've seen as of 6 a.m. this morning, there was no fiscal note attached to this bill. And I don't see where our military is actually defunded. I think it's incredibly unpopular, as we saw with the recent movements in the last few years about defunding the police, and I think that was unpopular across the entire board. And even if there was a loss in federal funding, I think we have to ask the question, is that money worth losing the lives of our fellow North Dakotans in unconstitutional wars? Mr. Chairman, I did see there was some opposition from the National Guard of a dollar amount. I'm not sure of the breakdown of that. That would be a question more for them, but I can certainly stand for any questions.
Well, I know you have somebody online, right, an expert.
I believe so. Yeah. I emailed.
Do you have that, Timothy? Is that person ready to go?
I sent an email to.
No.
I sent an email to Jackson this morning asking for the link to testify online, and I CC'd him. So I don't know if Jackson saw that yet or not.
Okay, so at this point we don't have that person. So
okay,
all right, and if we can get him, we'll make every effort, as I mentioned to you. So questions for Representative Heilman? Seeing none, any other further testimony in favor of House Bill 1315? Any opposition to House Bill 1315?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Government and Veteran Affairs Committee. I'm Jeremy Olson, State Representative 26, representing most of McKenzie and Dunn counties. I'm a former North Dakota National Guard soldier, former active duty Army officer. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. I stand before you to urge the rejection of the Defend the Guard proposed legislation of House Bill 1315. While the intentions behind this bill may be rooted in concern for our national sovereignty and the protection of our service members, it is my belief that the bill is fundamentally flawed and would have unintended negative consequences for both our national defense and the veterans who have served this country honorably. First and foremost, House Bill 1315 seeks to restrict state National Guard units from being deployed overseas military operations. On the surface, this may seem like an effort to safeguard the interests of states and their citizens. But in practice, it could severely hamper our military's ability to respond to national security threats quickly and effectively. Our military, particularly the National Guard, plays a vital role in a wide range of operations, from national disaster relief to combat missions overseas. National Guard units are often called upon to supplement the active duty during times of crisis, ensuring that we have the necessary resources and manpower to defend our nation. By requiring state legislators to approve overseas deployment, this bill creates unnecessary delays and bureaucratic hurdles in situations that demand immediate action. This legislation also raises serious constitutional and legal questions. The U.S. Constitution grants the federal government the power to raise and support armies and to provide for the common defense of the nation. While the National Guard is indeed a state-based institution, its federal mission is equally vital. The federal government, in partnership with the states, ensures that the Guard can function both locally and abroad as necessary. Requiring state legislators to approve every overseas deployment could create a patchwork approach to military readiness, where some states may authorize deployments while others do not. This could ultimately undermine the cohesion and effectiveness of the National Guard as a force, creating a situation where the federal government and state governments are at odds over how to respond to national security threats. Moreover, House Bill 1315 could provoke legal challenges that would tie up resources, divert attention from critical issues, and most importantly, distract us from our overall national security priorities. In conclusion, while House Bill 1315 may stem from a desire to protect the rights of states and their National Guard units, its potential risks to national security, legal stability, and the well-being of our veterans far outweigh any benefits. Our primary responsibility as policymakers is to ensure the safety and security of our nation, and this bill stands to undermine that mission. I respectfully ask this committee to reject House Bill 1315 and to work towards solutions that prioritize the readiness and cohesion of our military while respecting the vital contributions of our National Guard members. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Questions for Representative Olson? Representative Steiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Olson, so is the training different for a full-time Army soldier versus a National Guardsman who comes in once a month? What type of training difference do you have when you go overseas?
Well, it's been over 30 years, Mr. Chairman, Representative Steiner, it's been over 30 years since I went to basic training, but I went to basic training and advanced training with National Guard members, Army Reserve members, and active duty members. The training received following the initial and advanced training is up to the particular units. As with active duty units and Guard units, one unit may be different than the other as far as training capabilities and how well they are. I would probably defer that question to someone who has more recency with the National Guard training.
Representative Rohr.
Thank you, Chairman. So, Representative Olson, I noticed that in Representative Heilman's testimony, he indicated that there's 3 states where it's passed in one chamber. Have you had a chance with your connections to connect with any of the colleagues that you have there to discuss this with them and get an idea in preparation for your testimony?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Rohr, no, I did not reach out to those states.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We do have the individual online for support of House Bill 1315. Timothy, why don't we go to him? And please identify yourself, sir.
Yes, hi. My name is Dan McKnight. I'm the chairman of a veterans organization called Bring Our Troops Home, and we're the national sponsors of the Defend the Guard legislation.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today in support of Defend the Guard. Like I said, my name is Dan McKnight. I'm a 13-year veteran of the United States military, including a stint in the Marine Corps, the Active Duty Army, and the Idaho Army National Guard. I deployed to the global war on terror in Afghanistan in 2005 through 2007 as a member of the National Guard. I have intimate familiarity with this bill and the role of the National Guard on a world stage and a state and local level. This legislation has received national attention and widespread support from leaders who recognize its importance. When the New Hampshire House of Representatives passed Defend the Guard last year, Pete Hegseth, the current nominee for the Secretary of Defense, said on Fox News, "I love this idea," and his support didn't stop there. Last month, I met with Pete Hegseth in West Palm Beach, Florida, to discuss Defend the Guard. When I asked him his thoughts on the legislation, he said once again, without hesitation, "I love this idea," and he asked what he could do to help. Hegseth understands the value of the legislation not only for its constitutional fidelity, but also the protection it provides for the men and women of the National Guard. When I explained the opposition that we've encountered, namely thinly veiled threats of loss of federal funding by 1- and 2-star generals representing the National Guard Bureau, he was baffled and he asked, why would anybody possibly argue against this bill? His words are a powerful reminder. This bill is not radical. It's a return to the principles our nation was founded on. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution clearly gives Congress, not the president, not some unelected bureaucrat, the authority to declare war. Yet, for decades, presidents of both parties have ignored this, using the National Guard in conflicts Congress has never authorized. One stark and recent example of this is the Syrian civil war. In 2013, President Obama asked Congress to authorize military action in Syria, and Congress said no. Yet, the administration moved forward anyway, citing the Afghanistan 2001 authorization of use of military force as the authorization to go into Syria. That authorization was meant to target the perpetrators of 9/11. To justify American involvement in Syria is a stretch beyond any imagination. At the beginning of the Syrian civil war, less than 3% of the troops on the ground were from the National Guard, and by the conclusion of the war in 2024, when the Assad regime fell, over 58% of the troops, the U.S. troops on the ground in Syria involved in the war, were from the National Guard. These were ordinary Americans, teachers, firefighters, small business owners, sent to fight in an undeclared war that had grown out of control. Congress never approved it. This misuse of our National Guard must end. That's why Defend the Guard has earned the support of leaders like Pete Hegseth, Senators Rand Paul, Tim Sheehy, like Representative Hyman referenced. Others like Paul Gosar, who sit on the Appropriations Committee in Congress, have said that no single state would lose a penny of federal funding if this bill passed. A punitive action by Congress would never stand. They all agree that no war should begin without the consent of the American people through their elected representatives. And passing this bill will make North Dakota a leader in standing for the Constitution, for our National Guard, and against the dangerous precedent of these endless and undeclared wars. I urge you to join Pete Hegseth, myself, and all of the supporters of Defend the Guard across the country and pass this bill out of committee and onto the floor for a full vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKnight. We appreciate your testimony. And for the record, North Dakota military policy is not based on Pete Hegseth or anybody else. Thank you for your testimony. We'll continue testimony in opposition to HB 1315.
Good morning, Chairman Schauer, members of the committee. I'm Brigadier General Mitch Johnson, Adjutant General for the North Dakota National Guard, and I'm here to testify in opposition of House Bill 1315. Our United States military is a total force made up of active duty National Guard and reserves. The National Guard is the primary combat reserve of the Army and the Air Force. As Adjutant General, my main mission is to ensure the United States and the state of North Dakota have a trained and ready force. I have over 1,000 federally funded full-time employees who help me organize, train, and equip your men and women of the North Dakota National Guard. Additionally, I have hundreds of millions of dollars of federal equipment for my federal mission sets. If House Bill 1315 were to pass, North Dakota would become the only state where the federal government can no longer access the Guard unless Congress passed a declaration of war. With this declaration of war restriction in place, I would expect senior department defense leaders to direct equipment and missions to other states that are willing to support the national defense mission. Additionally, I would expect that a significant number of Guardsmen would leave North Dakota and join units in neighboring states or join the reserves because my Guardsmen want to do their missions. For the Guardsmen I would have left, I would expect to receive a reduction in funding for exercises and training. In a very short amount of time, I would expect to struggle with recruiting, morale, funding, and readiness. Currently, your North Dakota National Guard is viewed with respect across our state and nation. I have Guardsmen that are nationally recognized as leaders in their career fields and who are an example of how to do things right the North Dakota way. The support we currently receive from the North Dakota legislature has been instrumental in providing well-trained military teams ready to carry out our national defense mission. In return, the state receives the benefit of 4,100 professional soldiers and airmen from 200 North Dakota communities, all ready to serve our state during times of need. Additionally, our current National Guard missions and force structure have produced an economic impact of $660 million per biennium. Your legislation and support helps make this possible, and I ask for your continued support and rejection of House Bill 1315. I'll stand for any questions.
Questions for General Johnson? Representative Steiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Johnson, at one point, I'll just say my father was a colonel in the National Guard. So when he worked for them out of Frayne Barracks here in Bismarck in the 70s, he expressed concern on I can't remember if it was Guatemala or Honduras, but I remember how worried he was when the National Guard mission went overseas. And there was a time when National Guard only took care of flood and only took care of domestic issues. And at some point, the mission changed to help out the regular Army. And I remember his concern for his soldiers and his sleepless nights, and he couldn't wait till they got back in North Dakota. And what year was it the mission changed? Because there was kind of a mission creep of going to third world countries, if you want to call them that were getting on their feet and doing humanitarian missions for them, like helping them with food and water. And then from there, it started to go into more of a war situation. And he was concerned about the training levels were different, because he said the full-time, because he served in Korea, and he said the full-time military, they work at it full-time, and they are ready to go into combat at a different level. But this was in the 70s. Now, it could have changed since that time. So do you have any history of where, I don't want to call it mission creep, but where the National Guard used to be, where they were a defender of the nation, not going to foreign wars?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Steiner, I'll start with, we always have a federal mission. So I can't begin to guess what happened in the 70s, but apparently we were needed federally to help that piece of our federal mission. For instance, helping those countries do that. Right now, or in recent times, we've been needed federally to do a different mission set. So my answer to your question would be, our missions have changed, or the requirements the federal government needed from our federal portion of our force had changed. Does that make sense to you? I don't think we're doing a lot of work in Central America right now. That, as you described, we're doing work in different areas federally.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, if you could get us a history of the National Guard and how it's changed over the years, because to my recollection, growing up, it's changed, and it's yeah.
Further questions for General Johnson? General, this Defend the Guard movement, overall, how do you view it as hurting our national security?
Mr. Chairman, I'll use the MQ-9 mission in Fargo as an example. Those are remotely piloted aircraft that we can operate overseas from here. If the way I read House Bill 13, we would not be allowed to operate in combat outside the state. That mission would be that mission would lose its orders. So it would everyone who's currently operating that mission set would not be on a military order anymore. They'd have to go back to a strategic reserve, or not more of a reserve status, and just drill and train. I would expect the orders that they received to go to other states, probably some of the resources toward it, and then I would expect some of the folks in our mission to follow that, because they do like to accomplish that mission. So I would expect a mission set to move, and I would expect people to follow.
And when you're recruiting, are you telling new recruits that there's potential they could go outside of North Dakota in their duties and in their responsibilities?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. One of the first things they do is swear allegiance to their oath to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of North Dakota, which symbolizes the federal mission and the state mission of the Guard, singularly of the Guard.
we've had loss of life, as was pointed out, but in your opinion, has there been tremendous contribution from North Dakota National Guard soldiers in the various fights and wars and operations that they've conducted?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. We serve, as I've said, right alongside active and Guard. If you go overseas, and I've been there 6 different times, you look at name tapes and you don't know who's in the National Guard or who's in the active force. We have resources to train to the same level. We have exercises that can get us there, and then we serve right alongside them overseas. I really want to stress the teamwork portion of the military. At one point, maybe the military was in maybe more different silos, maybe what Representative Steiner described before, but it is much more of a total force right now with a total contribution.
Representative Christie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, is there a difference in pay for these individuals if they are deployed or in any capacity versus just a reservist?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Christie, absolutely. When we're deployed on active duty, we're on a Title 10 status and we're paid exactly the same as an active force. We're effectively on active duty. When I have a guardsman who maybe is a pure guardsman, drilling 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, they're paid just for those days that they serve.
If I could continue?
Yes.
So this would directly affect the pay benefits for them if they are not able to be deployed in some capacity.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Christie, when they deploy, they get the full range of federal benefits. So, yes, it comes with health care. It comes with some education benefits, depending on how long they serve, with the post-9/11 GI Bill.
Representative Rohr.
Thank you, Chairman. So, General, could we get some data in terms of how many times our Guard has been asked to do a federal mission? Just to get an idea of the volume that it would impact if this bill should pass.
Yeah, Representative Shaw, Representative Rory, absolutely. I can get you information. How far back would that like to be? Because I would probably be limited in my ability to go too far back.
Just the biennium?
Okay.
What do you think? 20 years? 20 years, would that be too much? Let's go 10 years.
Okay.
We'll use AI on that.
Okay.
General Johnson, thank you for your testimony. Further testimony in opposition to House Bill 1315. Please identify yourself. I don't think so.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Al Dorman. I'm with the Governor's Office. I'm also a veteran. I've served both on active duty and the National Guard. I don't want to repeat everything that's been said already, but some of the questions that have already been raised, I can maybe provide some additional information. You know, as far as for Representative Steiner, your father's experience in the 70s, you know, things change over time as policy changes. And during the 70s, following the Vietnam War, General Creighton Abrams, who was the Chief of Staff of the Army, said the biggest mistake we made in Vietnam was not calling up the Guard. Because when you call up the Guard, you call up every zip code in the United States. And if you want to make sure that you're doing what your citizens want you to do, you need that touch base. And he said it was a huge mistake not calling out the Guard. As far as the history of the Guard being part of the active force in times of national and international crisis, I would remind the committee that our militia, which turned into the North Dakota National Guard, fought during the Spanish-American War, during the Philippine Insurrection, where 9 North Dakotans earned the Medal of Honor. During World War I, the 1st North Dakota Infantry deployed in support of that World War. In World War II, our 164th Infantry Regiment was the first Army unit to engage the enemy in offensive operations at Guadalcanal. Long before General Patton landed in Africa, our North Dakota Guardsmen were engaged in the Pacific Theater at Guadalcanal and fought all the way through till the end of the war. So this has always been the case. When you join the National Guard, as General Johnson said, you take two oaths, one to the federal Constitution, one to the state Constitution. There are legal processes to bring the Guard into the active force. Declaration of war has sometimes happened, but there are authorities there that can allow the Guard to be brought onto active duty. Congress, during the Iraq War, gave the President the authority to call up soldiers for that conflict, but they did not declare war. So Congress still had a say in that process, but they have given the President and the Secretary of Defense certain authorities. There's been talk about, well, don't worry about the federal funds. They're not going to cut off your federal funds. North Dakota is in a great position because we have a senator on the Senate Defense Appropriations Committee and one on the Senate Armed Services Committee. So they have a policy guy and an appropriator. But if the federal government, if the DoD cannot access our forces, they are not going to resource us to train them to the level that they need to be to do their mission. And the reason that the Guard can respond and put out fires in western North Dakota on a moment's notice is because they have federal equipment and training, and they take that federal training and they use it for a state emergency. If we don't have the training dollars, even if we have the equipment, those crews may not be trained to the level that you need them to put out that fire. So, yeah, we can guess what may happen if we pass this, but if the federal government, if the Department of Defense cannot access our soldiers and airmen, they're going to have to put their resources where they can get access to the forces they need for whatever may come our way. So I do have concerns about that. It was discussed about the Guardsmen that we have lost in the global war of terror. I know pretty much every one of those families personally. Every family is different. Every family grieves differently. Every family feels different about their son's or daughter's contribution to our national defense and our state. I can tell you a lot of those families are incredibly proud of their service members' service. So I don't really want to bring them into this conversation. As far as what the defense secretary nominee might think, I used to be a lawyer, that's hearsay, so I don't put much weight on that. So again, the governor's office does not support this bill. There are legal issues with this bill. There are authorities in place that everything that has happened in the last 20 years and beyond have been legal. There has been challenges to the federal government's legal authority. I think Representative Steiner brought up Honduras. Minnesota challenged a deployment to Honduras back in the late 70s. That went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, the federal government does have the authority to call out National Guard for missions like Honduras. So those legal principles are well established. If we want to challenge how Congress and the Department of Defense and the President call up Guardsmen for these federal missions, using the National Guard in North Dakota is the vehicle to have that discussion is the wrong approach. Have that outside of the National Guard, but don't use the North Dakota National Guard as the vehicle to have this broader policy discussion. And I'll stop there and be happy to take any of your questions.
Questions for General Dorman? General Dorman, this movement is called Defend the Guard. What do you think of that title?
Mr. Chairman, to be honest, as a marketing ploy, we're not defending the Guard. We're restricting the President and the Secretary of Defense from accessing resources they may need to promote our national policy or defend our sovereignty. And I believe it's also arguably unconstitutional. I don't know if it's Section 2 of the bill that orders the governor not to comply with any order. But beyond that, again, even if we keep all of our soldiers and airmen, even if we kept all our equipment, which I find hard to believe if federal government can't access it, we're not going to be a priority for any new missions. We're not going to be a priority for resourcing. We're not going to be a priority for building new facilities like an armory in Jamestown, because why would you put your money someplace where you can't get a return on that investment? And from a governor's standpoint, well, from a state standpoint, if we don't have those highly trained soldiers and airmen, it will impact our ability to respond to disasters and crises in North Dakota. I mean, lately, whenever we have a problem in North Dakota, the solution is usually a Black Hawk helicopter with something hanging out underneath it. Whether it's a sandbag or a bucket full of water, that's the solution. That's a capability the federal government is providing the state of North Dakota, and they're providing all the resources to train those pilots, crew chiefs, and maintainers to get those aircraft up so they can get them on scene. You can make a strong argument that the National Guard with Black Hawks and something hanging out underneath them over the last 10 years have kept the town of Cavalier from going 1 foot underwater, kept the town of Medora from burning up, and prevented a lot of property loss and potentially loss of life in western North Dakota during the wildfires this past fall. So we can all talk about, well, it won't hurt the Guard, we'll be fine. This idea that it will help recruiting, I will challenge that. I know a lot of young people that signed up since September 11, 2001. They absolutely know what they're signing up for, and they want to contribute and make a difference. Every time the National Guard has a federal mission and there are slots to fill, I can guarantee you there'll be 3 volunteers for every open slot there is. These young people joined to be something bigger than themselves, to be part of a team, to do important things, to get back to their community. And if they turn into a Homeland Security force, just waiting for the next flood to maybe respond, hopefully be well trained, that's not what they signed up for. So I do think this would hurt recruiting. I do think it puts federal resourcing at risk. And I do think it puts both our country and our state at risk if we use the National Guard to make this political point.
Thank you, General Dorman. How does it feel to be a civilian?
Everybody asked me where I get my vintage clothing, and I said I bought it new in the 90s when I was the assistant state's attorney. So I see one other flowered tie. I was worried because everybody wore flowered ties in the 90s, and that's all I own. So
well, it's pretty impressive that you can still fit into your vintage clothes, so good for you.
I've been to the tailor a couple of times. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further testimony opposed in House Bill 1315. Any neutral testimony on 1315? We will close the hearing on House Bill 1315.